The 2015 visit of Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir to South Africa triggered one of the most significant diplomatic and legal crises in the country's post-apartheid history. The episode highlighted the tension between international criminal law, regional politics, and domestic constitutional obligations. Omar al-Bashir, then president of Sudan, was indicted by the International Criminal Court (ICC) for atrocities committed during the Darfur conflict. The ICC issued 2 arrest warrants in 2009 and 2010, charging him with crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide. The charges included murder, extermination, torture, rape, and intentionally directing attacks against civilian populations. The court alleged that Bashir played a central role in a campaign targeting ethnic groups such as the Fur, Masalit, and Zagawa. South Africa is a signatory to the Rome Statute, the treaty that established the ICC, and has incorporated its obligations into domestic law through the implementation of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court Act. Under these laws, South Africa was required to arrest Bashir if he entered its territory. However, the situation was complicated by the African Union's AU policy regarding sitting heads of state. The AU had adopted a stance opposing the arrest of incumbent leaders, arguing that such actions could destabilize peace processes and unfairly target African nations. The AU had also urged its member states not to cooperate with the ICC in arresting Bashir. The crisis unfolded when Bashir visited South Africa in June 2015 to attend the African Union Summit in Johannesburg. His presence created a direct conflict between South Africa's international obligations to the ICC and its political commitments to the AU. Civil society organization the Southern Africa Litigation Center, SALC, approached the High Court to compel the government to arrest Bashir. The High Court issued an interim order preventing him from leaving the country. Despite this, Bashir departed South Africa from a military airbase before the court could enforce its final order. The South African government justified its actions by arguing that Bashir enjoyed diplomatic immunity as a sitting head of state attending an AU summit. It also claimed that customary international law and AU agreements required it to respect such immunity. Critics, however, argued that South Africa had violated both its domestic law and its international obligations under the Rome Statute. The political landscape in South Africa at the time was marked by strong support for African solidarity and increasing criticism of the ICC. The ruling African National Congress (ANC) government, led by President Jacob Zuma, had grown more aligned with AU positions. Many African governments accused the ICC of selectively targeting African leaders while ignoring crimes committed elsewhere. South Africa echoed these concerns, framing the Bashir incident as part of a broader debate about the fairness and legitimacy of the ICC. Diplomatic cables and reports from the period revealed intense discussions within the South African government. Officials were aware of the legal obligations to arrest Bashir, but also faced pressure from AU partners and concerns about the diplomatic fallout of detaining a sitting head of state during an AU summit. These tensions contributed to the government's decision to allow Bashir to leave. In the litigation that followed, the South African High Court ruled that the government's failure to arrest Bashir was unlawful and unconstitutional. The court held that South Africa had clear legal duties under both domestic and international law. The government appealed, but the Supreme Court of Appeal, SCA, upheld the High Court's decision, confirming that Bashir did not enjoy immunity under South African law in light of the Rome Statute obligations.